Tonight, federal agents have uncovered over $250 million in cash hidden inside the walls of a Minneapolis charity.
At 10:23 a.m., inside the Hennepin County Federal Building, federal officials stepped in front of a wall of cameras and delivered a statement that stunned Minneapolis and sent shockwaves far beyond it. More than $250 million in cash, they announced, had been recovered from a well-known nonprofit long praised as a lifeline for East African refugees. The discovery was not the result of a drug bust or a dramatic standoff, but of a routine financial audit that uncovered numbers that did not add up. What investigators initially suspected was sloppy bookkeeping or isolated fraud quickly unraveled into something far darker. Behind the polished press releases and carefully staged charity galas, they said, lay one of the most sophisticated money laundering and human trafficking operations ever uncovered in the American Midwest. The organization at the center of it all was the Sunrise Community Foundation, a name that had become synonymous with hope in Minneapolis' Cedar Riverside neighborhood. Its mission promised refugee resettlement, job placement, counseling services, and youth programs. Its CEO, Farah Abdi Hassan, had built a public image of humility and service. He drove a modest vehicle, spoke softly at community forums, and stood beside elected officials at award ceremonies celebrating diversity and inclusion. Federal grants flowed steadily into the foundation's accounts. Private donors contributed millions more, believing their money would help families fleeing war and violence rebuild their lives. For years, Sunrise was treated as untouchable, a symbol of successful integration and compassion. That image began to crack in late January during a bitter polar vortex that left Minneapolis buried in ice and wind chills nearing 40 below zero. At 4:17 a.m. on a Sunday, more than 70 federal agents gathered outside the foundation's brick headquarters. The building looked ordinary from the outside, painted with murals of unity and decorated with banners proclaiming opportunity and resilience. Inside, investigators would soon learn it functioned as something else entirely. The breach was swift and controlled. Agents moved through hallways lined with framed photographs of smiling families and inspirational slogans. Computers were seized, filing cabinets cataloged, staff members detained for questioning. On the fourth floor in Hassan's executive office, an observant agent noticed a patch of wall that seemed newer than the rest. When he pressed against it, the surface gave slightly, echoing hollow behind the drywall. Moments later, a sledgehammer broke through. What spilled out was not insulation, but bricks of tightly wrapped cash stacked from floor to ceiling. The smell of old currency and damp paper filled the room. As more walls were opened, the same scene repeated itself. Money hidden in ductwork, sealed inside hollow beams, stuffed behind false panels and electrical boxes. By sunrise, over $22 million had been pulled from that single office alone. Simultaneously, another team raided a residential property in Brooklyn Park tied to a shell company called Northland Community Services. The quiet suburban home concealed a full-scale processing center. Industrial money counters, vacuum sealers, and shrink-wrap machines lined the gutted interior. Boxes labeled with destination codes, Nairobi, Mombasa, Dubai, Istanbul, Doha, were stacked in rows. Agents recovered an additional $28 million in cash and seized encrypted hard drives that would later reveal the operation's true scale. When forensic analysts finally cracked the files, they uncovered records spanning 6 years and more than $500 million in total funding. Federal refugee assistance grants, state contracts, private donations, and foundation awards had poured into Sunrise's accounts. On paper, the money was allocated to housing assistance, mental health counseling, food distribution, and vocational training. In reality, investigators found that less than 1/5 of the funds ever reached legitimate programs. The rest disappeared into a maze of ghost vendors, fabricated invoices, and shell corporations registered in multiple states. One invoice claimed $1 million for medical supplies sent to refugee camps in Kenya, yet the shipping address traced back to an empty lot in Indiana. Another documented $9 million for community centers that were never built. The listed contractor was linked to an identity stolen from a deceased nursing home resident. The funds did not simply vanish, they were methodically rerouted through currency exchanges abroad and informal transfer networks before being wired into overseas accounts connected to smuggling operations. Embedded in the encrypted data was a recurring phrase, Operation Horizon Bridge. Investigators soon learned it referred to a trafficking pipeline disguised as legitimate refugee relocation. Sunrise would identify vulnerable individuals in camps across East Africa, promising safe passage and new beginnings. For every genuine case processed legally, multiple fraudulent applications were filed to generate additional federal payments. Some victims were real people lured with promises of education and employment, only to be rerouted through transit houses in Turkey or Mexico and forced into exploitative labor or coerced into criminal activities. Others existed only on paper, phantom beneficiaries used to justify grant disbursements. Analysts estimated the trafficking network generated roughly $40 million a year, all funneled back through Minneapolis. As the money trail expanded, investigators noticed something unsettling. Oversight failures that should have stopped the scheme had been repeatedly delayed or dismissed. Attention turned to Commissioner Diane Hartwell, a high-ranking state official known for championing progressive social programs. Publicly, she praised organizations like Sunrise and signed off on emergency funding extensions. transactions. Privately encrypted communications revealed quarterly payments totaling more than $3 million to accounts linked to her financial advisor. Her digital signature appeared on documents that bypassed standard audits, and her office had blocked multiple federal review requests. The evidence suggested complicity at levels far beyond nonprofit mismanagement. That same morning, agents raided a former meatpacking plant in St. Paul purchased by Prairie Wind Logistics. The warehouse interior had been converted into holding areas divided by chain link fencing and plastic sheeting, equipped with cots, portable toilets, and bulk food supplies. Though empty at the time of the raid, discarded belongings indicated recent occupancy. A seized server contained manifests listing over 4,000 individuals who had passed through the facility in 3 years, complete with transit routes and final destination. The documents showed that Horizon Bridge aimed to establish a permanent corridor linking East Africa to the Midwest via transit hubs in Turkey and Mexico, with payments flowing to smugglers and corrupt intermediaries along the way. It began as a financial audit had escalated into the largest coordinated law enforcement operation in Minnesota history. More than 1,100 agents executed warrants across 6 states, striking 43 locations tied to the network. Storage units packed with counterfeit documents were seized. Wire transfer businesses that had moved tens of millions overseas were shut down. Safe houses in neighboring states were cleared. By noon, authorities had confiscated over $250 million in assets, millions in cryptocurrency, and dozens of illegal firearms. 94 individuals were arrested, including Hassan and members of his inner circle. That evening, federal marshals detained Commissioner Hartwell at her state office. She now faces charges ranging from wire fraud and money laundering to human trafficking and racketeering. As investigators traced funds further back, they discovered similar nonprofits operating under the same blueprint in other states, suggesting a broader pattern of exploitation. The numbers alone, hundreds of millions stolen, thousands trafficked, were staggering, but officials emphasized that the real cost could not be measured in currency. It was measured in broken trust and shattered lives. Families who believed they were supporting humanitarian work now grappled with betrayal. Legitimate social workers and nonprofit employees faced suspicion through no fault of their own. Survivors recounted journeys marked by coercion and fear rather than safety and opportunity. In the days following the announcement, Minneapolis residents gathered outside shuttered Sunrise offices, staring at boarded windows where murals once celebrated unity. The scandal forced a reckoning about oversight, accountability, and the ease with which compassion can be manipulated. Prosecutors pledged sweeping reforms and vowed to pursue every accomplice, while federal agencies initiated nationwide reviews of refugee grant programs. The arrests mark only the beginning of a long legal process, but the case stands as a stark reminder that corruption often hides behind reassuring language and well-tailored suits. Trust, investigators said, must be verified, not assumed. Systems built to protect the vulnerable must be guarded as carefully as the people they serve. Though this account is a fictional dramatization, the themes it raises about vigilance, transparency, and the safeguarding of public resources resonate far beyond a single city. Somewhere at this very moment, another grant proposal may be submitted, another shell company registered, another wall built to conceal what should never have been hidden. The lesson of Minneapolis is simple. When oversight sleeps, exploitation thrives, and when light finally breaks through, the truth can be more devastating than anyone imagined.